guys, welcome to the replacing soft drinks with fruit video. What we're discussing today is what are the effects of replacing soft drinks with fruit. Now the reason this is worthy of discussion is because soft drinks contain usually either sucrose or high fructose corn syrup, which is a source of fructose, and fruit is also very rich in fructose. So what we're effectively saying is what happens when you take soft drinks, which are relatively high in fructose, and remove them from the diet and replace them with another source of fructose, but in the form of fruit. Now, there's good evidence that soft drinks are detrimental to the health, and this has been related to the fructose that is present in the soft drinks. The metabolic effects are complex, but generally the fructose enters the blood. It's first of all the sucrose or the high fructose corn syrup is digested. It's digested to glucose and fructose. The fructose moiety is then absorbed. That passes to the liver, because the liver is the organ that deals with fructose. And in the liver, the fructose can be converted to glycogen. But if you overconsume fructose and the glycogen stores in the liver are full, the liver shifts its metabolic production of its metabolic activity, and it produces fatty acids from the fructose. There is a pathway called the de novo lipogenesis pathway, and this synthesizes fatty acids from fructose. Those fatty acids pass into the blood, and when they're in the blood, they can distribute it to tissues, and this increases the lipid content of tissues. And these lipids are thought to interfere with the insulin signal cascade, and this leads to insulin resistance. And this is the driver of all of the health effects, the detrimental health effects that derive from fructose consumption. It's the centering on the development of this insulin resistance, which leads to weight gain. It leads to obesity, and it can lead to a number of other Western diseases as well that are associated with weight gain and obesity, including cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes. So it's this disruption of normal glucose homeostasis that fructose is able to cause that is really the detrimental effects of soft drinks. Now, of course, fruit also contains fructose, and many people have said, why is it possible to eat fruit and not have these detrimental effects? And this is really what I'm trying to address in this video. So I'm going to limit the discussion to three main factors. The first factor is that it's actually difficult to overconsume fruit. Fruit is a source of fructose, and if you did consume lots of fruit, for example, if you managed to force yourself to eat the amount of fruit that was equivalent to the amount of that gave you an equivalent amount of fructose that's present in soft drinks, it may have some detrimental effects. But the fact is that it's very difficult to consume that amount of fructose from fruit, and this relates to the fact that the fructose in fruit is also present with quite a lot of water, and this water has it's one of the factors that limits the ability to consume the fruit, and the fact that also some fruit must be prepared, and fruit also has fiber in it. There are a number of different reasons why it's actually more difficult to consume fruit compared to a soft drink. Soft drinks contain the fructose in a liquid form. It's in solution. It's very easy to get a lot of fructose into your gut in a small amount of time. Clearly, it's not so easy to get that amount of fruit into your gut, and therefore you're limiting the amount of fructose you can eat. However, having said that, if you did overconsume fruit, there is the possibility it could cause metabolic dysfunction. So that is a caveat that must be you must be aware of. You can't simply consume huge amounts of fruit and expect not to get some of the detrimental effects of fructose. There is a cutoff point where fruit likely does actually produce metabolic changes, but it's not going to be at the amount and the levels that most people consume. At the levels of fruit that most people consume in a typical day. The second factor relates to the fact that fruit contains phytonutrients, and a lot of these phytonutrients are antioxidants, and some of these phytonutrients may have effects in the gut. Now, If we take the second, the second factor there first, some polyphenols, for example, have been shown to inhibit digestive enzymes in the gut. So there is some evidence that polyphenols may be able to actually limit the digestive rate and the absorption rate of some components of disaccharides or starches. And as some of the fructose in fruit is in the form of sucrose, it may be that some of the polyphenols in fruit are actually able to inhibit the enzyme sucrase. That limits the digestive rate of the sucrose, and that limits the speed at which the fructose can get into the system. The polyphenols are also antioxidants. Polyphenols generally have been shown to be antioxidants in humans. Fruit contains a wide variety of different polyphenols. For example, they contain flavonoids, which are one class of polyphenols which are quite rich in fruits and vegetables. And these decrease oxidative stress. And oxidative stress may be one of the conditions that's required for the development of insulin resistance. So by containing these antioxidants, fruit actually has the ability to reduce the risk of getting and developing insulin resistance. So these are counter-regulatory effects within the fruit that actually protect the consumer from some of the detrimental effects of the fructose. Now, those two effects, I would suggest, are relatively small, and taken on their own, they are probably not, very strongly contributing factors. Now, the reason I say that is because it's very easy to make fruit juice. Fruit juice would contain most of the polyphenols that are, present in whole fruit, but fruit juice is now being shown to be as detrimental as soft drinks in terms of the development of insulin resistance. So clearly, the polyphenols don't have that much of an effect. But I would suggest there is a contributory effect, with the main effect, and it's the third factor that I want to talk about, and that's the dietary fibre in fruit. Now, this is, I think, really the controlling factor in fruit that makes consuming fruit and consuming fructose from fruit, it doesn't produce any detrimental effects, and this is why the recommendation is to actually consume, higher levels of fruit. So, what is it about fibre that actually protects our metabolism from the detrimental effects of the sugars, particularly fructose? Well, fibre has the fibre in fruit is mainly in the form of soluble fibre, and that's mainly in the form of pectin. Now, soluble fibre has a number of properties in the gut. In the upper gut, in the small intestine, and perhaps even in the stomach, fibre may limit the digestive rate of compounds such as sucrose and high fructose corn syrup. It might actually inhibit the ability of the enzyme to collide with the substrate. If you've got an enzyme here and and a substrate here, if you've got something in the middle, the fibre, and it actually prevents the substrate interacting with the enzyme, clearly that's going to decrease the digestion rate of the sugars, and that's subsequently going to decrease the absorption rate of the glucose and the fructose, which make up sucrose and high fructose corn syrup. So there's an effect that fibre has in terms of limiting enzyme substrate collision rates. Fibre in the upper gut may also actually create a barrier down the enterocyte brush border. Now, this brush border is where the absorption of sugars occurs. They interact with transporters on the enterocytes, and dietary fibre, particularly soluble fibre, appears to be able to create a barrier, a physical barrier that slows the absorption of sugars that are in your gut. So those effects are in the upper gut, and they're not limited to soluble fibre, but soluble fibre appears to have particularly strong effects in relation to these kind of physiological changes in the gut, and really it's a physical barrier that fibre is providing, which slows the absorption of the digestion and absorption of the sugars. However, fibre is possibly also has an effect in the lower gut. Now, fibre is not able to be digested by humans. We don't have the enzymes to be able to digest fibre, but dietary fibre is really a form of carbohydrate. It's made of glucose units and other sugars linked together, but we just don't have the digestive enzymes to break those sugars apart. However, we have bacteria in our colon, and those bacteria do have the correct enzymes to break the fibre down. Now, these bacteria are able to ferment many of the dietary fibres that we consume, and they are able to ferment pectin. Pectin acts as a source of food for these bacteria, And so when you eat fruit and when you eat pectin and it goes into your colon, you're effectively feeding your bacteria. And what studies have shown is that this actually changes the microbial populations in your colon, and it actually changes them to a more favourable profile. And the bacteria in the colon are required for our health. There's evidence that they interact with our enterocytes. They produce lots of chemicals that we need, and increasing and changing these profiles. There's a lot of studies going on to look at the detrimental forms of bacteria and the beneficial ones. And consuming sugars is another mechanism to change the profile of the bacteria in the gut. So if you have a high sugar sugar diet, you're effectively feeding detrimental forms of bacteria that may therefore have subsequently perhaps produce toxins or have a detrimental effect on our health. If you feed your bacteria fiber in form of pectin, there's evidence that increases the synthesis and the replication of bacteria that are beneficial to our health. And therefore, because because fruit contains both sugars and pectin, it's probably not going to have that detrimental effect on simply providing a food source for the detrimental forms of bacteria. So it's really improving the gut health. Now, when the bacteria ferment the fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids. So that's acetate, butyrate, and propionate. These short-chain fatty acids also have effects in the gut, and in particular, they may actually lock onto receptors in the enterocytes. And there's a number of receptors that have been identified, and these receptors seem to then have effects on the gut. One of the things that they can do, for example, is cause the release of a hormone called peptide YY, and peptide YY is actually a peptide that is able to stimulate appetite. It's able to inhibit appetite, so it stimulates satiety. So this decreases appetite. Now, this is very interesting because when we eat fructose, fructose doesn't require insulin for its metabolism. So fructose in the blood doesn't cause a stimulatory effect on insulin, whereas glucose, for example, does. So why is that important? Well, insulin is one of the hormones that feeds back a signal to the hypothalamus to tell us that we have raised levels of blood sugar, and therefore it cuts off our appetite and stimulates satiety. So glucose is able to stimulate insulin, and that in turn stimulates our satiety. So glucose is a different sugar to fructose, because fructose, when we absorb it, doesn't stimulate insulin, and therefore we don't get that satiety signal with fructose, and therefore fructose is actually very easy to overconsume. If you're consuming high amounts of fructose in foods, particularly in solution, fruit juices, soft drinks, there will be some stimulation of insulin because there's some glucose in those compounds, but a lot of the sugar is made up of fructose. Therefore the insulin component is less, and therefore the satiety that you experience is also less. By stimulating peptide YY in the colon, pectin and other fibers in fruit are actually able to override that inability of insulin to stimulate satiety. There's a lower signal from the fructose, but you get a greater signal from you get a contributory signal from the fiber, and therefore there is a counter-regulatory effect there with the fiber in the gut. There's another hormone that's released from gut cells from interaction with short-chain fatty acids, and that's glucagon-like peptide 1. Now, glucagon-like peptide 1 is an incretin, and incretins are hormones that stimulate insulin. So not only does peptide YY decrease appetite and stimulate satiety, but you also get a stimulation of insulin from these short-chain fatty acids. And the insulin, therefore, is able to go to the hypothalamus. It circulates in the blood. The hypothalamus picks up the signal that there's a release of insulin, and that also stimulates satiety. So there is a double appetite regulatory effect from short-chain fatty acids in the colon, and this is counter-regulating the regulatory effect from the lack of a satiety signal from fructose when it's absorbed from the upper gut. So there's a number of reasons why consuming fructose from fruit is not so detrimental as consuming fructose from, for example, soft drinks, or not just soft drinks, but anywhere where there's fructose in its refined crystalline form, missing the fiber. It's the fiber content really that is possibly the strongest protector of the the detrimental effects of fructose in fruit. That's not to say that the fact that it's difficult to overconsume fruit, or the polyphenols in fruit are not having a contributory effect. Clearly, the fact that it's difficult to eat 5 or 6 apples, which is what you would require in order to get anywhere near the amount of fructose that you had in somebody that was regularly consuming soft drinks, you'd have to consume many apples, and that would just physically be difficult to do. They take a certain amount of time to eat. There would be you would get bored of it. You would probably not particularly enjoy eating that amount of an individual fruit. You can overeat fruit, but in a balanced diet, really, that's not going to be a factor. Whether the polyphenols have much of an effect, there is some evidence that they contribute, but it's not really known how much they do contribute. But I think really what it comes down to, if you want to sum this up, is that the detrimental effects of fructose in fruit is not really manifest in physiological changes, because there's also high amounts of fiber in the fruit. And this is one of the biggest reasons why I suggest that making smoothies and creating fruit juice from fruit should be done with care, and it should be, any fruit juice or any smoothies should be eaten in moderation, because a lot of these smoothie makers and fruit juice makers remove the fiber, and it's the fiber that will protect you from the detrimental effects of the fructose. So as always, eat well, stay healthy and protect yourself, and thank you for watching the replacing soft drinks with fruit video, and I will see you soon for another video. Please take care.